Like the rest of ASP.NET, ASP.NET Ajax is housed in an assembly that will be installed in the global assembly cache on your machine. And the assembly, if you want to go looking for it, is the system.web.extensions assembly. And you'll potentially have two versions of it, depending on whether or not you installed the 1.0 release that is specific to the ASP.NET 2.0 runtime, or if you're working with Visual Studio 2008 and the ASP.NET 3.5 runtime. So there are two distinct versions of this assembly that you might find. We'll be looking at this one here, the 3.5 version, as that's the one that's installed with Visual Studio 2008. So that's the server side. You'll have an assembly deployed on your server, web server, that contains the extension implementation. Within this extensions assembly, however, you will find a number of embedded resources, which will include a set of script files, which are of interest to us. So this is my rendering of an embedded JavaScript file here. And these script files are going to be downloaded by the client. So whenever you reference or include ASP.NET Ajax features in a page, part of the response included by the ASP.NET runtime for that page is going to be a reference to these embedded script files that will be brought into the client to supplement the client-side behavior and control interaction. So we'll take a look at that in a bit later as well. But that just if you're looking in your directories for these script files, you won't necessarily find them because they're by default embedded in the global assembly cache. Now, the other assembly that you might end up using is the control toolkit, and the toolkit is going to be deployed in a separate assembly, and this one is not deployed to the GAC, but rather into your local bin directory of your website or web application. And this is done sort of for versioning purposes, because this is a shared source implementation project. They hope to have continuous updates of this control toolkit with additional controls and features as it evolves. And to make sure that you don't that you're targeting the one you expect, they simply recommend that you copy this assembly into the bin directory of your site and access it that way. Now, if you want to go look for some of these components, let's go ahead and bring up the global assembly cache, which you can find under your Windows assembly directory, which has a default shell extension built in to show you all of the deployed assemblies on your machine. And what you should find if you scroll down is a system.web.extensions assembly. So there's my system.windows.extensions assembly here. And notice version 3.5 is the one that's currently loaded on this machine. So that's how you know you have the Ajax extensions in there. Now, the other thing you can download as a separate install from the core Ajax extension libraries is the Microsoft Ajax library, version 3.5. And this is a separate download. It is not required if you're just working with server-side ASP.NET and using the controls and then even doing client-side work. The reason this is here is if you are potentially working outside of the context of ASP.NET. So you're in a different environment, you're working with other script files, you may find it useful to include the client-side Ajax libraries. And so they provide this as a separate download for people that may want to leverage the client-side script files on their own without the server-side features. So if you drill into this directory, you will find these script files sitting right here. This can also be a nice way of just poking around and looking at the JavaScript file implementation. So for example, here's the core ASP.NET Ajax script file that will be included on every page that includes a script manager. And you can very easily poke around and look at the functions and classes defined here. So keep that in mind as an option going forward. Okay, now the Ajax extensions are divided into two sections of functionality. One is for the server side and one's for the client side. And you'll end up working with both inevitably, but very often you'll find yourself focusing on one or the other. Now, in terms of the functionality that's available in the server-side features, this is where they have support for wrapping that XML HTTP request object for doing the asynchronous callbacks. And you'll see several features tied into that, specifically the web service features, which we'll be taking a look at in more detail. There are also some Ajax-enabled controls. So there's a new control called a timer control. There's an update panel control. There's some other features in here. And support for the Ajax custom controls, which are the basis for the the Ajax control toolkit. So if you want to build your own set of controls like the toolkit provides, you'll use these interfaces and base classes to construct your own class definitions. This is also where we have the web service implementation. So there are actually two different versions of web services, one for the traditional ASMX endpoints and another one for WCF endpoints, which is the preferred model going forward. So these both WCF and ASMX support JavaScript callable web services by proxy generation in the client. There's also a couple of pre-built web services to expose some ASP.NET functionality from the membership provider and the profile service. So if you want to tap into authentication mechanisms using the membership provider, or you want to use the profile per user data store from your client-side code, there are some pre-built services you can tap into. And finally, there's support for JavaScript object notation, serialization and deserialization. So you can very easily take a .NET class and turn it into, or serialize its contents into a JSON string for transport. So that's the server-side features. Client-side features, we have a collection of JavaScript files that will be brought into your browser, depending on which features you end up using. And those files, as I showed you, are accessible directly on the file system if you install the client-side libraries, or they're generally going to be extracted as embedded resources from the system.web.extensions assembly. So these include a number of features. A lot of these features are designed to give you more .NET-like object orientation in your client-side script. So a lot of the classes and methods you'll see here are there to give you a more object-oriented experience in your JavaScript development, as we'll see later. There is support, of course, for the client side of the asynchronous callback mechanism. So there's a set of classes that lay on top of the XML HTTP request class, abstracting away that interface. There are several UI behavior classes. There's a course script class, web service proxy generation. So all these features are enabled by these client-side script libraries that are brought in when you start using ASP.NET Ajax. And the other useful thing to know is that all of these libraries are targeting an intermediate layer called the browser compatibility layer, which means that all of this stuff works across modern-day browsers that you would care about, including Opera and Safari and Firefox and IE, obviously. So if you're using any of these features, you don't have to worry about cross-browser compatibility. They all work just fine.